My fascination with Tibet began in the 1960s. I was 15 and the hippie movement with its unconventional philosophies and ways of life had just taken hold in America. I often visited alternative bookstores in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, and one day I found a book, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, in the Eastern Spirituality section. I read it for years until I found a deeper understanding of spiritual philosophy in Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. 3 years ago, an opportunity to visit Tibet arose when several devotees invited me to join them on a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash, the sacred abode of Lord Shiva, situated in the remote western part of the country. But our plans ended abruptly when the Chinese government refused our visa applications. My interest in Tibet was reignited last year when I met a Buddhist monk from Tibet in New Delhi. He was traveling to Bodh Gaya, the place of Lord Buddha's enlightenment in Bihar, India. The monk had encountered many difficulties in his travels, and I did my best to help him. In the short time we were together, a close, almost mystical bond arose between us, and as we separated, he told me he would leave something of great spiritual value for me in his monastery in Tibet. I wondered, of course, what he would leave for me, but I wondered even more how I would ever obtain it, though I am used to packing my bags on a moment's notice and traveling to wherever my service takes me. Tibet had never been within my realm. Then a few months ago, I received a call from the group who had planned the original journey to Tibet. The Chinese government was again issuing visas for Mount Kailash, and they asked if I would be interested in going, and of course I agreed. 13 of us were granted visas through an official Tibetan travel agency later on. My motivations for visiting Tibet went beyond the fascination I had had as a teenager, and even beyond the desire to obtain the gift from the Tibetan monk. My objective as a devotee of Lord Krsna was to obtain the blessings of Lord Shiva, who resides with his consort Parvati atop Mount Kailash. In Vaishnava teachings, we learn not to approach the Lord directly, but through his pure devotees. There's a verse, my dear Partha, Lord Krsna says to Arjuna in the Adi Purana, one who claims to be my devotee is not so, only a person who claims to be the devotee of my devotee is my devotee. And of all devotees of Krishna, Lord Shiva is considered to be the best. There's another shloka, Nimna ganam yata ganga devanam achyuto yata vaishnavanam yata sambhu purananam vidam tata. Just as the Ganges is the greatest of all rivers, Lord Achyuta, the supreme amongst deities, and Lord Shambhu Shiva, the greatest of Vaishnavas. So Srimad Bhagavatam is the greatest of all Puranas. Mount Kailash, it's 22,000 feet, 6,700 meters above sea level. And it's very special because it's the sacred Dham where Shiva meditates on Lord Krsna and meets with great sages like Narada. It was at Mount Kailash that the Ganges descended with great force from the spiritual world to the material world and was caught by Lord Shiva in his matted locks. The demigods observed Lord Shiva sitting on the summit of Kailash hill with his wife Bhavani for the auspicious development of the three worlds. He was being worshipped by great saintly persons desiring liberation. The demigods offered him their obeisances and with prayers offered him great respect. That's again from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Kailash is also known as Mount Meru, the center of the universe. Throughout the ages, it has been called by various names, including the Jewel Peak, Lotus Mountain, and the Silver Mountain. The city of Kuvera, the treasure of the demigods, is said to be near Mount Kailash. Local Buddhists recognize the spiritual significance of the mountain and consider it one of their holiest places of pilgrimage. It is also fervently worshipped by followers of the Bon religion, the religion of Tibet prior to the arrival of Buddhism in the 7th century. Tibetans say that there is an invisible ladder connecting Kailash to heaven, and the rulers of ancient Tibet were said by their citizens to have descended to Kailash from heaven, attached to ropes of light. Because of the mountain's sanctity in the eyes of several of the world's greatest religions, no one has ever attempted to climb it. Reinhold Messner, the famous Austrian mountaineer, who has scaled all 14 of the 8,000-meter mountains of the world, was offered a license to climb Mount Kailash by the Chinese government in 1980s. Of course, I denied, he writes, it would not have been intelligent to do otherwise. One should not trample on the gods, he said. A Buddhist saint once said, only a man entirely free of sin can climb Kailash, and he wouldn't have to actually scale the sheer walls of ice to do it. He just turn himself into a bird and fly to the summit. Through the centuries, Westerners have been attracted to visit Kailash, not for spiritual reasons, though, but out of curiosity. The first recorded Westerner to visit Kailash was an Italian Jesuit missionary, Ippolito Desideri, who in 1715 he wrote, "Kailash is a mountain of excessive height and great circumference, always enveloped in clouds, covered in snow and ice, and most horrible, barren, steep and cold. The Tibetans walk devoutly around the base of this mountain, which takes several days, and they believe this will bring them great indulgences. Owing to the snow in the mountain, my eyes became so inflamed that I well nigh lost my sight." Hours arriving in Lhasa at 11,000 feet, 2,500 meters above sea level, most of our team began struggling with altitude sickness known as mountain sickness also, caused by reduced air pressure and lower oxygen levels that affects climbers, skiers, travelers. At times, altitude sickness can be life-threatening, causing pulmonary edema or cerebral edema, fluid accumulation in the lungs or the brain, both of which require the sufferer to be evacuated to a lower altitude. In most cases, those symptoms are mild. There's difficulty in sleeping, you get dizzy, there's fatigue, headache, loss of appetite, nausea, and vomiting. Altitude sickness was an ongoing problem for us during our stay in Lhasa, one of the highest cities in the world. I had acclimatized myself somewhat by spending 12 days in the mountains of Kashmir before the trip to Tibet. Most of the other members of our team, though, suffered from headaches and dizziness during our first days in Tibet. While they rested, I decided to take a look around the old city of Lhasa that I had heard about during my youth, It was harder to find than I expected. Much of the city had been rebuilt with endless modern structures like apartment buildings, office buildings, and shopping complexes. The romantic idea of exotic spiritual Tibet I had formed as a young man seemed nothing more than an insubstantial dream until I rounded a corner in the city and saw thousands of Tibetans in traditional dress walking in pilgrimage around the sacred Zhonghang Temple, built, I think, in 1652, the most important site of a pilgrimage in Tibet. Hundreds of Buddhist devotees were bowing down repeatedly while others walked around the temple fingering their wooden prayer beads as they chanted, Om Mani Padme Hum, I worship he who sits on the divine lotus. I joined the surging crowd circumambulating the temple and then just sat down amongst the pilgrims. I immediately became an object of discussion. I was pleasantly surprised that everyone, without exception, welcomed me, and several even came over to congratulate me on my good fortune to be there. When I took out my japa beads to chant, swarms of curious people surrounded me and listened attentively to my chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra.
Well, if someone were to ask me about my relationship with Lord Shiva, I would simply say I wish I had one. Because, of course, Lord Shiva is the greatest of Vaishnavas. And in our Vaishnava tradition, in order to become a devotee, one must worship and take shelter of a senior devotee. And to that extent, for many, many years now, at least 10 plus, I've been worshiping Lord Shiva with the Mahaprasadam from the deities and praying that he would give me entrance into Vrindavan Dhama. This is one of the services that Lord Shiva provides to the sincere Vaishnava. He will award entrance into the holy Dham.
When I found out we were coming to Mount Kailash, it was never something that was on my radar or something that I thought about doing. And because it kind of fell out of the sky, so to speak, I took it that it was the Lord's desire to be here, for me to come and do this. So then I wanted to understand, well, why? Why does he want me to come? And I began to read more and more about Lord Shiva, because this is Lord Shiva's place. And Srila Prabhupada speaks a lot about how Lord Shiva loves devotees. He just loves devotees. Even his own followers are not so dear to him, but his devotees of Krishna are really, really dear to him.
I generally don't go anywhere unless I'm invited, but when I heard that His Holiness Indradyumna Swami was going to do the Kora, I couldn't resist but ask if I could come along, and he kindly gave me his mercy. But then a little time later, when I heard about the risks involved of high altitude sickness, I actually was a little bit concerned, and I started reading up on it, and then I began to think that maybe it's not such a good idea for a guy my age, etc. I love the fact he goes on these adventures, but it just seemed a little bit over the top. So I asked to not be included, but it was too late because the visa had already been made for a group, and every person on the group has to go. So I realized that Lord Shiva somehow or another wanted me to come. And in that way, I began to understand that my desire to get purified, to get my movie projects made, and that they weren't being done, my devotional service was being stymied. This was an invitation by the circumstances to come and prostrate myself to the greatest Vaishnava, ask for his mercy. He's the one who kept the instruction of a spiritual master topmost in his mind, just like our divine spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So in this way, I'm on this trip to hopefully get purified from my false ego and be able to go on and make wonderful theatrical movies that carry Krishna consciousness to the masses.
The next morning, we were meant to fly to Nagari, a city just 100 kilometers from Mount Kailash, but we were informed at breakfast that the flight had been canceled. China's security was on red alert because of North Korea's recent test firing of missiles, and it was another setback in our pilgrimage. The only other way to reach Mount Kailash was a 4-day drive across 1,300 kilometers of mountainous roads. Our government travel agency provided 2 SUV cars with drivers, a small truck for our luggage and cooking equipment, and 2 official guides who were required to be with us every minute of our stay in Tibet. Ultimately, their presence worked to our advantage because wherever we went, we were subjected to strict security checks. Upon departing Lhasa, we learned that a storm and cold front were about to descend on western Tibet. We had to get to Mount Kailash as fast as possible. By driving 17 hours one day and 11 hours the next day, we managed to cut the journey in half. The long hours in the car were austere, but gave me time to reflect again on the purpose of our journey to Mount Kailash, which was, again, to obtain the blessings of Lord Shiva, that we might become better devotees of Lord Krsna and his representative, my beloved spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. After 2 days of driving, we approached Ravanatal and the even more important nearby lake of Manasarovara. It's called Mahapamtosha in Tibetan. Every pilgrim takes darshan of Mansarovar on the way to Mount Kailash. It is famous for 3 things: its changing colors, its infinite variations of reflection, and its fearsome storms. On the top of Mount Kailash, Lord Shiva and Parvati once sat in deep meditation on Lord Krsna for 12 years by the calculation of the demigods. No rain fell in the area during that period, so Lord Shiva called Lord Brahma to create a sacred lake where he and his consort could bathe. Lord Brahma created Mansarovar from his mind. After their bath, a self-manifested golden Shiva lingam appeared in the center of that lake.
I'm not emotionally, physically or spiritually fit to be here. I'm here only by the mercy of my dear friend Sri Rasa and by the mercy of my spiritual master. And I'm seeking for the mercy of Mahadev. I'm here on behalf of all my friends who asked me to pray for them, and I'm doing as much as I can. I hope to satisfy Mahadev and to get his permission to enter Sri Vrindavan Dhama. Let's see how it will go. Haribol.
From the Chaksel gang, we had a clear and direct view of Mount Kailash's beautiful, awe-inspiring southern face. All the devotees lay down on the ground for a few minutes of rest. Already exhausted by the high altitude, I began to wonder if I could carry on, especially when I saw the trail ahead. From where we were, it entered the glacial Lachu Valley, a flat, rocky wasteland that wound along vast, scraggly mountain slopes. The weather was changing for the worse, and we didn't want to lose time So we rode in jeeps to where we had stopped the day before. After walking for an hour, I realized how physically and emotionally exhausted I was from the events of the previous day. I asked one of our guides if he could arrange a horse for me. Bada Haridas and Ram Vijay also asked for horses. The guide found horses to rent further down the valley, and all three of us began. We rode and the others walked at different places, braving the high altitude. We all chanted and absorbed ourselves in the remarkable beauty of the scenery. The mountains were beyond description. I remembered a quote from the Ramayana, where it said, "There is no mountain range like the Himalayas, for this range contains both Kailash and Mansarovara. As the dew is dried by the morning sun, so our sins are dried when we gain sight of the Himalayas." Beautiful quote. By late afternoon, all the devotees reached Dirapuk, our campsite for the night. The yaks, which had carried all our paraphernalia up the day before, were waiting for us. Situated at about 5,000 meters, the site allowed us a view of the soaring, resplendent north face of icy Mount Kailash. I prayed for the eyes to see the spiritual beauty of Kailash, which is described by Srila Prabhupada as a celestial place, quite different from the cold, icy granite mountain I was now seeing.
Made our vratas and our prayers. We're as close to Mount Kailash as we're ever going to get. And we're going to take rest tonight and do another 18 kilometers tomorrow. And we should know that at least 20 people already on this journey have died in the past month. So this is not something to joke about. It's a very serious endeavor.
Right behind me we have Mount Kailash. We've come for the darshan, but darshan doesn't just mean we come to see the Lord or his devotee or some sacred place. It means they get to see us too. So we're praying that Mount Kailash and Lord Shiva and Parvati will look into our hearts, purify us, and awaken that prema, that love of Godhead for Radha and Krishna that we so much desire on this Kora, on this parikrama here at Mount Kailash in the western region of Tibet. Hare Krishna.
We've made it to the base of Mount Kailash. This is the best spot to view the entire mountain. Now we look at that mountain behind us and it's all covered in snow and barren and not very inviting, but Srimad Bhagavatam tells a different story of Mount Kailash. So it means we have to have purified vision. We have to use that Premanjana Charita to see the real Mount Kailash where Lord Shiva resides, and in that way take his blessings to be able to advance in devotional service by seeing everything in our life through that devotional eye.
It's real purification of the heart, and it's what we pray for. And Lord Shiva's kindly granting us that purification that we need, desperately need so much. And although it's a very austere place, at the same time we know that Lord Shiva is an extremely merciful, kind, soft-hearted, and loving devotee, the greatest devotee of the Lord. So we feel his presence here in both ways, in his purification and in his mercy.
It was the closest we would come to the mountain itself. We began our second day, the day of departure from the false ego, after a breakfast of hot porridge. Nobody ate much, as the fire of digestion is not strong at such altitudes. The second day proved the greatest challenge of the Kora. We had to walk or ride more than 10 kilometers upwards to the highest point of elevation on the Kora, a pass called Droma La at 5,630 meters. It would take approximately 7 hours. Before leaving, I sat down in a quiet place and meditated on beautiful Mount Kailash. I took out my notebook and read several verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, trying again to see the sacred mountain through the eyes of Scripture. One quote, the abode known as Kailash is full of different herbs and vegetables, and it is sanctified by Vedic hymns and mystic yoga practice. Thus, the residents of that abode are demigods by birth and have all mystic powers. Besides them, there are other human beings who are known as Kinnaras and Gandharvas and are accompanied by their beautiful wives, who are known as Apsaras, or angels. That's from the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Again, we made our way in small groups at different paces. Clouds moved in at mid-morning and rain began to fall. The storm we had feared was upon us. Several hours later, cold winds picked up and the rain turned into sleet and then snow. Everyone, including our guides and horses, moved at an agonizingly slow and painful pace, and our faces were whipped by little drops of ice and freezing cold droplets of water. Each step took an immense amount of strength, and I could see everyone was gasping for oxygen in that rarefied atmosphere, except the Tibetan pilgrims, who walked past us one group after another at a steady pace, eventually disappearing in the distance. I was wearing many layers of clothes, but I was chilled to the bone. The protection of my layers was no match for the harsh weather. As I was contemplating the severity of the cold, a jeep with an open cab and several somber-faced policemen inside rumbled down the rough terrain towards us. When it passed by, I gasped at the sight of a dead man lying face up in the back of the cab, his ankles and wrists tied with rope. He was fully clothed for doing the Kora and had apparently died while doing it. I glanced over at one of our guides. He just shrugged his shoulders as if to say, no big deal. It happens every day. My lamentation about the cold melted away. I was grateful I was still alive. Eventually, I came to a small plateau. A passing pilgrim told me it was the famous Shiva charnel ground, named after a place of cremation at Bodh Gaya in India. Pilgrims undergo a symbolic death at Shiva Shal. It is traditional to leave an item of clothing or a bodily part, such as hair, teeth, or blood, to represent the renouncing of life. In fact, what is being renounced is the false ego, the false identification with the material body, in favor of a true spiritual identity. For followers of Vedic tradition, such renunciation means giving up all temporary bodily designations, such as race, nationality, family name, fame, beauty, and all material attachments, and realizing oneself as a pure soul is servant of Krishna, servant of God. It is said those who are close to that goal of self-realization immediately leave their bodies while passing through the Shiva Sal, charnel ground. I left a favorite hat as a sign of renunciation and prayed to Lord Shiva to help me realize that I'm an eternal servant of Krishna, but I didn't leave my body. Disappointed, I mounted my horse again and continued up the steep pass. I was encouraged, though, when an old sadhu I had never seen before loudly greeted me with the following statement, "O Kailash Vasi, O resident of Kailash." I took it to mean that although I had a long way to go in spiritual life, Lord Shiva was pleased with my humble prayers at the Shiva Sal charnel grounds. Though I had ridden and not walked up the steep path, I was exhausted from the harsh atmosphere, the altitude, and the cold. A posted sign read 5,630 meters. Because of the extremely high altitude, pilgrims are warned not to stay there longer than 10 minutes. Navigating my way down the steep ridge, I saw to my right a beautiful turquoise green lake that I had seen in photos. It was Gaurikund, the lake of compassion. The lake is the bathing place of Parvati, Lord Shiva's consort, and the site of numerous pastimes between them. It was here that Parvati performed austerities to win Lord Shiva as her husband. Devout followers of the Vedic tradition bathed in the frigid waters to become freed from sin. I resisted the temptation. Watching two pilgrims struggle to get down the jagged hill to bathe in the Kund, I reflected on how simple and sublime the path of Krishna consciousness is compared to other paths which encourage great austerities and penance. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Raja Vidya Rajaguyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam. He says that this knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and it is joyfully performed.
In 15 years from now, we'll look back on this and realize how blessed we were. What an amazing opportunity this was. Right now we're struggling, we're short of breath, so many difficulties, but when we look back on this, it'll be an amazing memory. Sites like this right here, this beautiful river following us the entire way around Mount Kailash, crystal clear, tasty, cool, refreshing. These are the sites that are real life. That life in the city with skyscrapers and subways and hustle bustle, that's not it. This is it.
Perhaps the most deepest impression I've left with is that how people come here to worship. And that's actually why we go to a Dham, to worship, to develop our devotion. So that's left a very deep impression on me. Everyone sees Mount Kailash as a divine personality. And of course for us in our Vaishnava tradition, we see that the personality who rules this, oversees this divine abode is the personality of Lord Shiva and his consort, Parvati. So leaving here, I'm left with an impression of deep devotion for the sacred Mount Kailash, for Lord Shiva, Parvati, and the many pilgrims that come here to awaken their devotion for something transcendental within their hearts. Hare Krishna.
Feels like here on this height you're a little bit closer to the Lord and that your prayers, they become more sincere, maybe because of austerities maybe because of the influence of this holy place. But certainly this is a lifetime journey, and I will take it with me, and keep it in my heart.
My journey to this Kora has been very personal for me, because Lord Shiva was very much instrumental for me to come to the association of devotees. It was because of Lord Shiva that I met the devotees as well as Shri Gurudev. So when this opportunity came, I was very humbled. I felt a lot of gratitude, and I felt a personal connection that somehow Lord Shiva was once again being merciful to me 15 years later than the first time when he introduced me to the devotees of Krishna.
Yeah, it's very transformative, hard to describe. Never be the same after this. The whole way, due to the austerities, made me feel like, how will I get through this? And now I'm feeling like, how will I go back? It's a very unusual feeling. I'm very, very grateful to have had this experience, and feel a little bit more appreciation for the devotees. I feel a great appreciation for the indigenous people here and their own form of bhakti, their own worship. And feel grateful to have had this opportunity. Hare Krishna.
Real adventure is to be found in service to the Lord and His representatives. This is why we were on the Kora, trying to attain the blessings of Lord Shiva. There are, however, easier ways to get His mercy. When we reached our campsite, we found the same rudimentary facilities as those of the previous night. Once our packs were brought off the yaks, I changed into dry clothes and jumped into my sleeping bag to try to warm up. Later that evening, I was dozing off in the freezing cabin, and I wondered if the second day of the Kora, the day of departure, had had any tangible effect on me. I once again prayed to Lord Shiva to help destroy my material attachments and grant me eternal residence in Sri Vrindavan Dhama. We awoke to a sunny morning on the last day of the Kora, the day of renewal. Renewal means that having gone through so much austerity on the Kora, the pilgrim would be purified of sin, so that his or her spiritual nature would shine forth. When I looked in the mirror that morning, all I saw was an unclean, bearded, disheveled person. But in my heart, I had the feeling I had become purified. That morning I chanted my japa with extra attention and relish. But the Kora was not over by any stretch of the imagination. We still had 12 kilometers to trek until we reached our original starting point, the village of Darshan. The path wound up and down, several gorges that run along the Indus River in ancient times, called the Sindhu. The gorges were so steep that they were unsuitable for the horses. When we were 1 hour into the trek that morning, the Tibetan family that had rented the horses to us appeared from nowhere to reclaim them. All that kept us going from that point on was the thought that by evening we could take our first shower in days. It was late afternoon when we walked out onto the open plain and into the village of Darshan. Our Kora was officially finished. We all prostrated ourselves on the ground in the direction of Mount Kailash and paid our final obeisances. I stayed on the ground for a long time reflecting on the journey and all that I had undergone. It had been an adventure, but having completed the Kailash Kora, I would not recommend it as an adventure for most Vaishnava devotees. The risks are too great, but I indeed felt I had become a different person, reborn, purified, and cleansed. While walking the path of the Kora, I felt I had also journeyed further along the path of bhakti to Lord Krsna. I got up and took a last glance back at the arduous path we had traversed. Then, without looking back again, I walked forward toward my next service for my spiritual master. But wherever that service takes me, part of my heart will always remain in the mountains and valleys of Mount Kailash. I pray that all the mystic sages and rishis who reside there, and most important, Lord Shiva himself, will truly accept me as a Kailash Vasi, a resident of Kailash, that mysterious and sacred abode.